A few more corrections need to be made to this area of the superstructure. This section of bulkhead needs to be cut out. The underside of this platform should be open. In addition to the removal of the bulkhead blocking the signalmen's shelters, these recesses need to be filled. I'll fill them in the same way that I filled them on the platform below. Once those modifications are complete, this section of superstructure can then be painted and installed. To start, I'll cut out these bulkheads. Since a lot of the plastic in this area needs to be retained, and I don't want to accidentally strain it and cause problems later on, I'm going to start this process using a small saw. Sawing plastic will definitely not distress it, whereas if you're using clippers, because the plastic needs to move out of the way of the blades, it can cause the plastic to bend. I'm trying to avoid that. The difficulty with the saw is that there's not much space to move it, so it is only going to get me so far, but any little bit helps. After sawing off as much as I can at the bottom of the bulkhead, I've then opened up space where I can start using clippers and clip out chunks of this bulkhead. Hopefully these notches that I've cut gives the plastic sufficient space to move and it doesn't bend the deck above. It seems like I did this correctly. I'm able to take out these chunks without causing damage to the plastic. That's good. Now that I've been able to remove the majority of the plastic with the clippers, I need to spend some time cleaning up the surface. At this point it's still too rough to sand, so I'll start by using a blade to cut off shavings until I get it relatively smooth. And then I'll use a file to finish off that edge. On this inner section of bulkhead there are some burrs that also need to be removed. The file makes quick work of it. The internal bulkhead is too short. I suppose that's because Trumpeter did not expect this bulkhead to be visible to anyone. It would be enclosed entirely within the exterior bulkhead, so no one would see it, so I guess they decided it wasn't important to extend it all the way down to the floor. Since it is now possible to look into this area of the ship, I think it's important to extend this bulkhead so that it reaches the floor. This is not a precision task. I just need to stick some styrene at the base of that wall that's tall enough such that it touches the floor. So after preparing appropriately sized pieces of styrene stock, I glue them in place using Revell Contactor Professional. The next issue that needs to be resolved are these recesses in the deck where the landings for the plastic ladders would go. Since I'll be using photo etched ladders, those recesses need to be filled and shaped correctly. If I don't, then there'll be this ugly step in the deck, which is incorrect. I'm going to follow the same process that I did in the previous videos. Instead of trying to find or cut appropriately sized pieces of styrene stock, since I'm not using the ladders themselves that came with the kit, I simply will cut their landing off of the top of the ladders and then glue them in place. These landings, after cutting and filing them, aren't exactly square, but that isn't really concerning me. It's more the thickness that I find important. I want it to be level with the deck. I also noticed that when placing these parts in the recesses, they are quite big, which is a bit strange because I'm not entirely sure how the ladder would fit through here very easily. So after I've stuck them down, I think I'm going to need to open these holes up a little bit more, and that'll give me another opportunity to square off the sides of the hole itself. Anyways, for now I just need to prepare these little blocks of plastic as best as I can, and after getting them into a reasonable shape, I glue them into the recess using Trumpeter extra thin plastic cement. While those fillers are drying, I can return to the bulkhead extensions that I installed earlier. That glue should have sufficiently dried. Styrene stock was a bit tall, so I need to sand off a small amount. And as I sand, I just check it and make sure that it's going to sit nicely on the piece that goes below. Once the bulkhead is sanded to the correct height, and then return to the recesses that I've filled on the deck, I need to get rid of those lines from where that piece of plastic is inserted. I'm using Trumpeter plastic putty to perform that job. After giving the putty a few hours to dry, it's ready to be sanded. The only area that's a bit awkward to sand is this inner one. Not able to easily reach it from the sides because they're bulkheads, and then there's this raised plastic section in the middle, which is where part of the superstructure is going to go. This means I'm unable to just put a file on it flat and very quickly take off the top. So I'm going to have to do this more slowly with sandpaper. To protect the bulkheads, I apply tape to the sides. That will just help me be certain that I won't accidentally shave off the top of those railings and make them shorter than they're supposed to be. Fortunately, I didn't put on that much putty in this area, so although this is a bit awkward, it didn't take too long, and I was able to smooth it out so that this area of the deck is nice and level. For the aft two openings, it is significantly easier. There aren't any obstructions in this area, so I'm able to sand far more freely. In this case, I use a 400 grit sanding sponge to remove the excess. Now that all the corrections have been made to this area of the ship, I can prepare it for painting. But before I paint, I like to put on the surfacer to make sure that any scratches that I've imparted or defects in the modifications that I made to the part can be revealed. The surfacer has a tendency to help with correcting or filling the smaller micro scratches and revealing the larger defects. I'm using Mr. Surfacer 500 to surface this part. After applying the surfacer, I'm quite happy with how it's looking. This is a close-up shot of the area. Keep in mind you are very zoomed in at 4K, so you do see imperfections, but these imperfections are unnoticeable when looking at this part with the naked eye. In the next video, I'll take the last few steps required before I glue this part to the part that I completed in the previous video. If you would like to support this channel or see how this ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.